friends, I hope you're well. I thought I'd check in and chat with you about the books I'm currently reading, or which I plan to be reading over the course of the next few months. Over on Instagram earlier this week, or maybe it was last weekend, I shared a stack of 10 of those books. Most of the ones included in that post are the ones I'll be talking about today, save a few that I swapped out for a few titles that I thought I would prefer to read sooner rather than later. Quite a few of you asked me if I'm really reading 10 books at once, and the answer is yes, sort of, a little bit, and I'll explain. I read 4 to 5 books at a time every day, and I might juggle between 10 or 12 or however many, a chapter or two from each one in the morning, and then the next day it could be a different handful of books that I'm reading. So I am reading them sort of simultaneously, but not all at the same time. This is a habit that I picked up when I was caring for my grandmother in the last few years of her life. I would go to her house on the weekends when the caregivers needed days off, and I would spend the entirety of the day over there, and sometimes even the evening and the night as well. And because she spent most of this time sleeping, I just needed to be there to keep an eye on things, or if anything went wrong, or just to make sure she was okay. But there wasn't a lot going on, and so I had a lot of downtime. I'd often bring projects with me, such as my writing or some knitting or a movie, but more often than not, it was a stack of books. Of course, I found myself scrolling through my phone instead of doing any of these things, and that's a little bit infuriating because it's such a huge time suck and you don't have anything to show for yourself afterwards. And sometimes on top of that, you even feel kind of lousy about yourself because of, the things you're seeing people do on social media. And that's not a great feeling. None of that is great. So what I did is I promised myself, I said, hey, if you read a chapter or two from each of these 5 books over the course of the next hour, then you're allowed to spend about 5 minutes on your phone at the end of that time. And so I would do that over the course of the day. This made the day go by so much more quickly. It kept me off of social media, which is, I think, always a good thing. I mean, I love social media, don't get me wrong, but I think we all know that you can spend too much time in there. And as an added bonus, I got through a lot of these stacks of books that I'd been meaning to read but had never gotten around to. So that's how this habit got started, and I read this way to this very day. So in that vein, I'm going to talk about some of the books that I'm reading right now, and peppered throughout the video, I think I might share some of these other habits that I engage in while I'm reading. With that said, let's just get right into it. The House Guest and Other Stories by Amparo Davila. It's difficult to say what these strange slice-of-life snippets are about. The characters are often fearful of something nameless, or if their dread and paranoia does appear to focus on something concrete, whatever that is, it probably won't make any sense. I would suggest these ominous visions are best experienced in the lull of liminal hours for people keen on terse tales of unease and unidentifiable weirdness. Strangers, Essays on the Human and Non-Human by Rebecca Tomas is an exploration of the world and our relationship with nature through a series of essays linking the environmental, the political, the folkloric, and the historical. It felt like a deeply necessary, urgent read for all human people anywhere along their journey who wish to experience life and living in a profoundly intimate and compassionate way. There is one particular essay about a cockroach that I highly recommend, and that is a sentence I never could have foreseen myself typing out. The second habit that relates to my reading is that I always keep a notebook and pen nearby when I'm engrossed in a book. Whether it's to jot down an unfamiliar word or turn a phrase, to capture a sentiment that particularly ensnared my heart or set my imagination alight, or make notes on this, that, or the other interesting tidbit or topic for further research. I have found my book notes absolutely essential to deepening my experience of and engagement of a story while I'm reading it. Equally as important, I revisit the thoughts and words I recorded there for inspiration in my own writing when I'm working on various projects. Blue by Yoshikazu Takeuchi. I was reminded of having rented from Blockbuster and watched Perfect Blue many years ago when I recently spied it on someone's Goodreads list and realized that the film I had seen was either originally based on a book or that there was a book adaptation of the film. Intrigued, I found a copy online and probably paid way too much for it because it's not easily available. For those unfamiliar, the basic premise is that there is a cute Japanese pop idol, Mima, who is working to transform her image to something a little more mature and risque, and this does not sit well with an obsessed fan who desperately wants her to remain pure, and he thinks he has a plan to save her soul. After finishing the book, I immediately had to rewatch the movie because aside from the very basic plot I just gave you, they are handled so differently. The movie, directed by Satoshi Kon, who also did the fantastically bizarre Paprika, was a surreal psychological thriller in which there are actually several characters who are experiencing unraveling mental states or are losing or have lost their grip on reality. It's not just got an eerie vibe, it's downright sinister feeling. The book itself is so much more straightforward in terms of being a stalker slasher story. If you like twisty and thinky and strange, go for the movie. If you like twisted and gruesome served straight up, then I would suggest you go for the book. Dead Blondes and Bad Mothers, Monstrosity, Patriarchy, and Fear of Female Power by Sadie Doyle. Though I am not very far into this book by essayist, social critic, and culture buff Sadie Doyle, I can tell you two things. A history and examination of the patriarchal and misogynistic fear of monstrous women, covering everything from literature and cinema to mythology, religion, history, and current events through the lens of a brilliant and funny writer, is right up my alley. And two, Black Phoenix Alchemy Lab has created an incredible collection of scents inspired by the book and the monstrous feminine archetypes which perpetually recur in storytelling. They are all really interesting fragrances and they are still available for purchase. I will link to the site in the description box below. For habit number 3, I will share with you that I used to be a complete and utter monster. I used to dog-ear my books to mark my page, but no more. I have become a major bookmark enthusiast, and I have an entire box on my shelf devoted to them. As I have mentioned in previous videos, I'm a passionate art collector, and when any of my favorite artists release a version of their work in a bookmark format, I will always grab one. Aside from that, I recycle the postcards and note cards and greeting cards sent from friends and use them to mark my place in a book as well. I've got quite a surplus at this point, and whenever I gift a book, I always slip one of these tiny pieces of art into the pages to accompany it. Oh, and if you have an Instax camera or a Polaroid, those snaps make great little bookmarks and gifts to put in books as well. Making Magic, Weaving Together the Everyday and the Extraordinary by Briana Saussy. An idea that's become a way of life for me, though it's been a long journey in becoming so, is that there are potential portals to magic that permeate every instance of our lives if we slow down, take notice of them, and actively choose to think of them as such. Our everyday routines are more than just rote habit. They can be truly sacred rituals full of pleasure and meaning. In Making Magic, Briana Saussy speaks directly to this belief and writes of how magic is found at the very roots of our experience. Magic doesn't have to be this arcane, abstract thing. It belongs to everyone, and it's a part of everyone's actual lineage. Filled with exercises, hands-on work, and guided journaling, Briana's book helps us to remember and reimagine how to engage with the extraordinary in everyday life. The Weird and the Eerie by Mark Fisher. I originally learned of this author on an episode of the Faculty of Horror podcast in which hosts Andrea Subasati and Alex West were discussing the 2000 Stephen King adaptation film The Mist, which I don't know about you, but that is a bleak masterpiece, and it's probably one of my top 10 favorite films of all time. I have not read any of Mark Fisher's works, nor had I even heard of him before this podcast, but in doing a tiny bit of reading, I believe he was an academic, a theorist, and a philosopher, and he often wrote on dark and difficult subjects. I'm sad to learn he is no longer with us as he passed in 2017. The Weird and the Eerie offers discussion of the literary styles that one might describe as weird or eerie, and which can be found in forms of fantastic fiction. I'm not very far along into it, and I have a suspicion that this is going to be one of those difficult reads that's even more difficult to discuss, especially if you're someone like me who's lacking an academic background. But for purposes of clarification, and because I found it interesting, here's something I read in an article about Fisher's differentiation of these two terms, and I'll link to this in the description box below. The weird should be understood as that which does not belong, most commonly finding expression in the conjoining of two or more things which do not belong together. The eerie, on the other hand, indicates a different type of affect, one that is not so much about the terrifying intrusion of something that does not belong, but more often with a frightening absence where one would expect a presence. Witch Hunt, A Traveler's Guide to the Power and Persecution of the Witch by Kristen Soleil. If you have read this wondrously knowledgeable scholar, historian, and second-generation witches' previous offerings, Witches, Sluts, and Feminists, Conjuring the Sex Positive, and Catcall, Reclaiming the Feral Feminine, then you were no doubt over the moon to learn of her most recent title, Witch Hunt, a hybrid travel guide and memoir which at points dips into the realms of historical fiction. Witch Hunt reflects research gleaned from travels to 7 countries, 45 cities, towns, and villages. Through her intrepid adventures across Italy, France, Germany, Ireland, and the United Kingdom, Soleil explores the fraught and fascinating histories of these haunting figures from the past and uncovers how the archetype of the witch has been rehabilitated as a symbol of power. For our fourth habit, I don't think we can talk about cozying up with a book, or at least I can't anyway, without the very important discussion of what snacks accompany your stories. When I was young, I used to pilfer oyster crackers or saltines from the kitchen cupboard and stuff them under my pillow to nibble on when I was rereading Harriet the Spy for the umpteenth time. When I was old enough to buy my own snacks, I would pour a combination of various snack-sized baggies of Cheetos, Doritos, and Funyuns into a bowl and munch on what my sisters called a Sarah Special. Mock all you like, but to this very day, I maintain that is a delightful treat. As an adult who is more concerned with appearances than I was as a teenager, I'm too embarrassed to be seen shopping for things that coat your fingers in orange dust, so instead I make a big batch of popcorn, drizzle it in butter, sprinkle it with nutritional yeast, nori, and flaky salt for a savory, salty, crunchy snack that is only slightly less embarrassing, and if you saw how much of it I can put away in one sitting, you'd see what I mean by this. Foreshadow, Stories to Celebrate the Magic of Reading and Writing YA by Emily X.R. Pan and Nova Rensuma. Editor Emily X.R. Pan shares in the book's introduction that Foreshadow is an ode to the short story, and that what makes this medium of storytelling so remarkable is how the author must sharpen the experience of a story and condense it into something powerful. They must take all of the things that make a good novel and compress it into a neat little package. She further reveals that when we, quote, tell the blank page a story, it will tell you who you are, and that, quote, always there is something of the author preserved like a fossil in amber. You can see it so much more clearly because the story is sliced so thin. If this sounds like the editors of this collection are excited at the opportunity to celebrate unique young adult short stories and showcase underrepresented voices in the genre, and if that is getting you excited too, I think that excitement pays off in the luminous and fantastical stories they've chosen to include. What makes this book even more special is that after each offering, the editors take a closer look at the techniques employed in the story, highlighting different aspects of the craft. In addition to that, there are writing prompts and interviews with the authors about their processes and inspiration. Sonnet to Science: Scientists and Their Poetry by Sam Illingworth. In Edgar Allan Poe's Sonnet to Science, the poet laments the dangers of scientific development and its negative implications for poetry and creativity. Illingworth, an expert at the forefront of the intersection of science and poetry, disagrees with these sentiments, noting that the more we find out about science, the more we realize what a beautiful and incredible world we live in. With this book and its account of 6 groundbreaking scientists who also write poetry, Illingworth is attempting to determine whether these disciplines are complementary, whether scientists who embrace poetry were also increasing their understanding of the world, expanding their language, and thereby their capacity to communicate their science to others. The 10th and final book in this stack is Unknown Language by Hugh Lemme and Hildegard von Bingen. For those who are unfamiliar with Hildegard von Bingen, she was a 12th century mystic, scientist, composer, herbalist, and inventor of one of the earliest known constructed languages by a woman. Educated from the age of 8 at a Benedictine monastery and later becoming an abbess, Hildegard experienced prophetic visions since childhood and spent many years writing her visionary works. She is a truly fascinating human, but I'm going to be honest. I'm a few pages into what reviewers are calling mutant fiction of speculative mysticism, and I have got no idea what the heck is going on. So I'm going to cheat and read to you the back of the book. I'm also going to link to a very interesting interview with Lemme in the description box below if you're interested in more of the author's thoughts. In this story of survival and miracles, Hildegard encounters love, both queer and divine, and great peril. As the visionary healer travels through the unfamiliar landscape following a great cataclysm, she discovers the mythic quantum energy of viriditas in the natural world around her. Her journey becomes one of return to the sacred truth of her own being. I'm going to further cheat by sharing with you what I messaged to a friend shortly after beginning this book. I'm reading this and getting spectacularly excited and emotional, and I don't know why, because I don't understand any of it. But it's like my little cells and atoms are all crowding together and jumping over each other in a frenzy, shouting, "I know this, I know this." I feel them bubbling and boiling in my blood because I bet they do know something, and my brain just hasn't figured it out yet. I suppose this last habit is more of a compulsion, really. When I finish a book, I immediately have to begin a new one. No waiting. I get antsy and irritable and weird if I don't have my next read lined up and ready to go after the final page of the previous book has been turned. So what are you reading right now or over the next few months? What are your reading habits, good, bad, weird, or otherwise? Please let me know in the comments below. I am always intensely curious about things, and feel free to chat amongst yourselves about all things book related. If you enjoyed today's bookish chatter, please give this video a like, and I hope you'll consider subscribing to my channel for more reading related content amongst other things in the future. Thanks again for stopping by to see me today. Until later, weirdos.